Alex Creel here. Someone gave me a challenge to explain to you in a few minutes, sort of life, the universe, and everything, how the political system really works based on the flow of power and money. And I'm going to try and do that now. And if this presentation really changes your understanding of how the political system works in the US and elsewhere, then please sign up and join us or contribute to our work. Otherwise, it has to stop. So this is a pretty significant presentation. So the starting point is, of course, an election seems pretty straightforward. It's the people get to choose between a number of candidates, and the winning candidate gets to run the government for a period of years, let's say 4 years. So far, so good, right? But then we have to be realistic and start thinking about campaign financing. We know that's an issue. Campaign financing is provided by, in some cases, corporates, but mainly by individuals. So in the US in particular, a group of about 30 uber wealthy have a very big role to play in funding presidential campaigns. So we need to add them in. So here we go. That's our 30, the oligarchy, I call them. They're allocating for 2024, they allocated out about 2.6 billion across those two candidates, and one candidate winning, managing the state. And we're still here doing our voting down here. Now, the first big conclusion from this is that essentially you have two processes. One is behind the curtain, which is the selection process, where the oligarchy get to decide amongst themselves, who's going to be the preferred candidate in terms of funding. And then that candidate comes out the front of the curtain, and we get to perform in the sort of theatre that is the actual election itself. And I've explained in the various papers that I think the selection process is far more important than the theatre of the election process is the thing that we can see in front of the curtain. So this is very important to understand what's going on in that selection process. But we're not finished now, because if that was it, that would be pretty straightforward. But it gets much more complicated than that, because the oligarchy, with their enormous wealth, that enormous wealth derives from financial assets, which are fixed income and equity securities almost exclusively of large listed companies. Of course, there's all kinds of other assets, but that is the backbone of any portfolio that they have in their foundations. So I need to add the ownership in those big businesses. Now, when we add in the big businesses, we add in another link, which is the fact that those big businesses also do business with the state. And that's more or less in some sectors. So obviously, in a sector like healthcare, or in a sector like defense, the state's role in providing revenue to those big businesses is very, very important. In other areas, it's obviously less. So here we are. That's where we are now. Then we start adding in an element, which is the lobbying. So we now add in the fact that big business lobbies the state. So the actual size of lobbying in the US on one particular year is 4.2 billion. So that gets pushed in through lobbying organizations, and that creates this little box, which I've called really a life raft. So whichever politician doesn't get elected, he can go and sit in one of these life raft lobbying organizations for a number of years until he gets re-elected again. So that guarantees effectively, that is permanent Washington. These guys can stay and live in Washington, earning a very good salary, whether they're elected or not elected. And that also perverts the system to a large extent, but it also means that they need to stay on the good books in order to get their lobbying positions. So that is also important to remember. So we've added in now the lobbying section. Then we add in another very unhealthy line, which is what we all becoming to know about, which is the share trading activities of the politicians. That's another huge conflict of interest area that ties them again much more into the corporate sector than into dealing with the people. It's just another unhealthy link in this system. Then we go now to the next final chunk of activity, You'd hope you'd be done with lobbying, but of course, there's another whole area, which is the think tanks, which is another huge area of influence. So those think tanks generally are funded by both oligarchs and by big business. So I'm putting in an estimate of, let's say, 2 billion a year going into think tanks. I'm going to do a bit more work on that because I know how much goes into defense, but I don't know the other sectors. Green is an enormous area of oligarch investment into think tanks from a guy called Sir Chris Hon, who I guess many of you will never have heard of, but he is the guy handing out the checks to fund green think tanks. And that stuff is really, really important when it comes to what policy the government actually ends up setting. Now, the other half of that money is coming from big business. So you can see now already the kind of money interests that are involved in policy setting by the states. So you've got the allocation of campaign funding. Then you've got this huge 4.2 billion a year coming in from lobbying all the time. And then you've got a whole bunch of think tanks, dozens and dozens of them in Washington, who more or less, as far as I can work out, actually write policy. So at this point, the poor old people down at the bottom who do their vote once every 4 years, I think are going to be largely forgotten in this scheme. And I think that is essentially the reality. And you look at that then on war. Let's look at war. Hands up, anybody who wants war with anyone, and no hands will go up. No people anywhere ever in any population basically ever wanted war. But that's not necessarily the case amongst the decision makers. So, in the conflicts we're looking at now, Israel, a lot of those oligarchs have explicitly said that Israel must be supported no matter what. So, they do want war. Then you have these sections of big business who also want war. The defense contractors, obviously, but then you get these crossover businesses between tech and defense. They also want war. Now, there could be I think oil will also want war. Now, there could be businesses to sort of offset that who would be against war, but they're not going to be as significant as the businesses that do want war. So once those two pieces are in place, then of course you got the think tanks lobbying for war and the whole lobby organization going for war. So again, the people that don't want it are down at the bottom, and their influence is just going to be less. You can see that from this diagram. Look at those money flows: the 2.6 billion in campaign funding, 4 billion in lobbying, and somewhere about 2 billion in annual expenditure for all the think tanks, more or less based in Washington. And of course, the interactions there are daily. Whereas the interactions with the people are once every 4 years, you put your cross in the box, and that's your lot. So it's not surprising that these green ticks pro-war are going to have more influence, and they're going to outrank what people actually want. And I think that's why we've been in a situation of forever war. I've never met anyone who's ever wanted to be in that situation of forever war. The only people I hear shouting for forever war are the Washington warmongers like Lindsey Graham, who incidentally is also financed by the National Jewish Congress, I think it's called, and by Lockheed Martin, by Boeing, and the United States Department of Defense. That's a typical case of why these guys are always warmongers and why I've never met a single person that wants to be involved in those forever wars. That outcome is a reflection of this system, which is so heavily driven by cash. And it really only works if the politicians, the red guy and the blue guy, have absolutely rock solid ethics and a total undivided focus on America first. And that has not been the case, I don't think, for a long period of time. And I think the ethical side we can all see everywhere. I mean, I'm British, so I don't see it in the US so much because I don't follow it closely. But ethics in Britain has collapsed in the political sphere. It's basically gone. These guys are absolute prostitutes, do whatever they want to do. They tell lies 24/7, no problem. There is no ethics in this system. And without it, it's going to get more and more captured by vested interests and do things to further those vested interests. Now, if you want to deep dive, there's a video on Rumble, which I've built up a network diagram from actual filings of all these foundations. And you can see the key elements in the defense area or the foreign policy setting area. Those are the think tanks, and behind you, I've shown you the light blue are the defense contractors, the some oligarch foundations in green, and general corporates in orange. So you can see the pieces, the layers of that cake, how it's made up, and that's again why I can tell you about those conflicts of interest because we've done the donkey work. And incidentally, this research barely exists anywhere. You know, that also is a big signal. So, all these universities up and down America, maybe all over the world, huge departments churning out hundreds of reports a day. What I've just told you is almost impossible to find anywhere. I've had to do it ground up from the absolute beginning, from starting with the 990 filings and building those network charts. And we've got quite a few more of them, but nobody is looking at this stuff because nobody wants you to know about this and think about it. Which is again why if we don't get funded, we're going to stop it and this is gone. If you think this is valuable, we need to be funded and we need to be supported. And then now we get to the let's choose the least bad option in every election. And I think one of the most brilliant guys anywhere as an author, C.S. Lewis, who was also a devout Christian, had this to say, which I think is very pertinent to our election system. Satan always sends error into the world in pairs that are opposites. His great hope is that you will get so upset about one of his errors that you'll react into the opposite one and he's got you. Now, you think about elections in the West over the last 15 years, where you've just gone from pillar to post. And then the next guys come in and do exactly what the guys before were doing. And we've already got this phrase in the UK and in the US, the uniparty. We've started to realize that behind both of those red versus blue are the same people doing the same thing. And that really got me thinking about C.S. Lewis's quote. I think it's really very relevant. Now, the other thing is people say, look, you have to go with those big parties because that's they've got traction, they've got media exposure, and etc. And that is true. And of course, the reason they have traction and the reason they have media exposure is they're not on your side. They are working against you. But what you don't know, and you'll never hear about on the media, is the absolutely phenomenally active ecosystem of dissent and opposition. So many people working with no funding, so many hours. I've only just put a few of them up there here. There's so many of these organizations. This is the way out of the mess, is the grassroots opposition. And I mean, all the logos are there. I'm not going to read them all out, but the volume of work being done by these organizations and individuals is mind-blowing. And it's coming from the right place. It's coming from a place of integrity. Therefore, I think it has every chance of success. I'm also convinced if it wasn't for these organizations, we would have those vaccine passports. We'd probably be in lockdown, and we would definitely be having masks. And you know, you can't run the counterfactual, but I'm very, very certain about that. Those heroes of yours that you're presented on a plate now, where were they? Where were they in 2020, 2021? Where were they? Where was Douglas Murray? Where was your friend Dr. Campbell, who was pushing the vaccines? These guys were nowhere. The people on the front then are the people you know are on the right side of this, and they keep working and they keep fighting against the state oppression. But the guys you're given on a plate, if someone's handed to you on a plate, he's working for the enemy. Almost guarantee that. So, just as an example, just this week, Hart have coordinated a very long letter to Kemi Badenoch, setting out very clearly all the horrific consequences of the insane COVID policies, something you won't get from that completely useless and staged COVID inquiry. And that letter signed by hundreds of people, including, I just put one page screen grab up here, very, very important professors. And Lord Mooney, Professor Watson, Professor Enos, Professor Goddard, Professor Fenton, Professor Fairclough. That's one page. This goes on for pages and pages. Will you hear about this on some kind of controlled media channel? No, you won't. You have the feeling that there's nothing going on, whereas there's a lot going on, and you're not supposed to know about it, which is why I do this video. Now, The final thing I'd like to wrap up is, well, hopefully you've got a better understanding of how that cash works, how politics works, how influence works. And this is probably one of the best quotes on the forces that drive politics I've ever seen, from a guy in 1790, John Philpot Curran, who is enormously underrated, a real champion of liberty that nobody's ever heard of. But this is what he said: "It is the common fate of the indolent to see their rights become a prey to the active. The condition upon which God hath given liberty to man is eternal vigilance, which condition, if he break, servitude is at once the consequence of his crime and the punishment of his guilt." Now I think that's a fantastic quote, because he accepts that there will be these people, and we have them now. He wrote that in 1790. Today we have these big businesses and billionaires meeting in Davos at the World Economic Forum, hatching plans. They've produced literally thousands, probably tens of thousands of pages of white papers on the Internet of Bodies, the Internet of Things, on everything that they're interested in, on digitalizing healthcare. I mean, it's a huge website. There's goodness knows how many tens of thousands of hours of work have gone into those things. Now, I disagree with them, but they've done the work. Right now, they are the active, and we collectively are the indolent, and we are losing our rights, and that's what's happening. And this is really a call to action for people to get involved, because my understanding of the dissident movement is it's falling apart, in the sense people are burning out. I've certainly stopped at one point because there was just not enough support generally coming in. When a lot of people sign up for a free Substack, it doesn't help at all. In fact, it's a bit of a slap in the face that people want the work but don't want to pay. It doesn't feel good. So you will never get a solution imposed on you or given to you from the top down. That's never going to happen. So I've done those videos on reform. I've explained why I think it's just another pen to herd you in and keep you safely locked up, which is a shame, because I think there's a lot of good people in that organization. But that's what happens. They create these diversions, anything to prevent you actually getting to the nexus of power and stopping that oppression of the individual and keeping that sort of corporate oligarch oppressive state intact. So if you want to do something about that, you have to roll up your sleeves and join in one of those genuine organizations. There's so many of them. So for us, you can email me at info@thinkingcoalition.org if you want to volunteer some time. We need people in social media. We need people to be ambassadors, to set up little local groups. We can have 10 or 20 or 30, even better, 100-person meeting in whatever it happens to be in your area, and make the presentation, explain what's going on. Very keen to do that, but we need volunteers to do that. And of course, we need some money. I took obviously quite a big hit to do this work, but that's okay, as long as there is some financial support for us. And it's too small at the moment to actually carry on. And it's just not reasonable to expect to do that. And also, if anyone gets this who is perhaps a bigger funder, there is a funding proposal and also an advertising proposal. So you could if you contact us at info@thinkingcoalition.org, we'd be happy to share that as well. And in my particular case, those little presentations I gave, they take a lot of work. I mean, literally years plowing through all of this stuff to come up with those charts. I'm not blessed with the vision of some guys like Bob, who clearly gets it all. I don't know if he's lucky enough to have to escape plowing through all these accounts and filings and who knows what else. But in my case, it's very much bottom up, churning through all this material. There's huge amounts of work involved. So, if it can't be funded, then it has to stop, which I think would be a shame for everybody. So please take a minute, sign up on Patreon, sign up on Buy Me a Coffee, or better still, sign up on Substack. I think the value of the Substack proposal is mind-blowing. You're getting insights into things that is really hidden. I challenge anyone to find just what I've told you now easily available somewhere on the internet. I don't think you'll find it. And it's there through the Substack. It's kind of well written. It comes out with regular updates. I think it's brilliant value for money. You're going to need it, because these guys, their plans are not good. And if you don't want to hand in the dystopia that they're building to your children, you need to get involved. Thank you. Bye. Stay free.